Good evening. It's Steve Hassan, Dr. Steve Hassan, with my first YouTube Live. I've been very active, as many of you know, trying to put out as much content as possible to share my knowledge that I've accrued over the last 46 years, having exited the moon cult in 1976 and becoming a licensed mental health professional, and more recently getting my doctorate. So I giving it a try. We've asked for some questions that people might like me to answer, and we're going to go for an hour for this introductory YouTube Live. And there's tons of content on my website. You'll see it down scrolling, freedomofmind.com. We have a great search engine, and freedomfromundueinfluence.org is the nonprofit that's oriented for research. So going right ahead, let's jump into the first question. So there it goes. So someone asked, is there a mind control Cold War in the USA? My answer is, what do you think? I always love to ask questions, by the way. But if you know anything about my book, The Cult of Trump, that's exactly the thesis, that we are living in a cyber warfare, psychological operations environment where we have not only state actors like Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, but we also have former military intelligence officials who know how to do psychological warfare, like Michael Flynn, who's doing the whole digital soldier QAnon, thing with Christian dominionists and right-wing Christian theocratic folks who want to destroy the separation of church and state. And in my book, I talk about things like fourth generation warfare, which, by the way, if you go to freedomofmind.com and put in fourth generation warfare, you can listen to a former naval intelligence official who's an expert in psychological warfare and fourth generation warfare. It's essentially attacking legitimacy of experts, institutions, of science, questioning reality to confuse you, to disorient you, and to render you more susceptible to a repetitive, simplistic, black and white message that's very fear and emotion-based, hate-based. So yes, we're having a Cold War happening, psychological warfare, and the polarization didn't just arrive, it's been worked on for decades to get to the place that we are today. But I'm here to say that there is strategy to have hope and to undo all of this. But the solution, from my point of view, comes from my work, individual work with people. It used to be called deprogramming. I hated that term because people are much more complicated than computers. But to the extent that people's minds are programmed to get them to do reality testing is the name of the game. And the best way to do it is psychological education. And that's why I keep sharing interviews, doing podcasts. So that's that question. Do insecure people join cults? This is a loaded question. So what I do want to say is every human being is vulnerable to believing a lie or a series of lies. Human beings are particularly situationally vulnerable if they've gone through a divorce or a breakup or death of a loved one or illness or a pandemic or economic challenge or moving to a new city, state, or country. So what I'm trying to say is it's a normal part of the human condition to undergo situational stressors that can make one insecure. about who am I and where do I belong and what do I believe. And there are tons of people leaving authoritarian cults that they were born into, religious cults and all kinds of other things. But unless they understand brainwashing and mind control, unless they network with ex-members who are further along in the healing path, then they're going to be perhaps more vulnerable to someone with a multi-level marketing scheme. Hey, you want to make $1 million part-time? Just come to a presentation, whatever. And then the other thing I want to comment about this question is that I think it's wrong to just say about people joining cults, because my experience is people get deceived and recruited into cults, and the idea of joining is just too some assumes that you know what you're doing and you're voluntarily doing it versus you're the subject of systematic manipulation. Another question, why are cults so common in the USA? Well, there are a bunch of countries that have a ton of cults in them. The countries that don't have a lot of cults in them, frankly, are dictatorships where there's an authoritarian at the top that wants to control everything. And so they want to have control over any group that has that kind of persuasions. For example, China was very threatened by Falun Gong, a kind of Tai Chi cult with a leader who claimed to be, UFO, alien, whatever, living in the United States currently. But my thing right now about the USA is that if you want to start a religion in the USA, all you have to do is say, God came to me and told me to start a religion of Steve Hassan, and you apply to the IRS, and there's no checks and balances. There's no consumer fraud entity that people can go to. And so it's kind of a pass to do all kinds of criminal activities in the United States. And then I want to make one more comment before we go on, which is I have, if you know my work, an influence continuum. I'm going to just hold up a little graphic. This is on my website, freedomofmind.com. Go to where it says learn about undue influence. And so for me, I see cults along the entire continuum. Healthy, productive cults where you know what you're getting into, it respects your authentic self, you have conscience, critical thinking, you can read whatever you want. And then the dark side, which is the dissociative disorder, where you're programmed in with a pseudo identity. So the idea of cults being so common, it really is, for me, not just a derogatory term. I prefer to use the term destructive cults or authoritarian cults concerning the groups that I work with as a therapist. And here's a question about Asperger's. And I actually did a free webinar for a wonderful resource group for folks on the spectrum. It is aane.org. And if you come to my website, freedomofmind.com, put in Asperger's, you'll see a blog that has the link to my webinar. And essentially, folks on the spectrum love my influence continuum and bite model of authoritarian control because it's an easy way to assess whatever you're getting into. Sorry, it's a little shiny. Because the more behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, the more authoritarian the group is. And I also have a ton of questions people should ask before they make any commitment to give their time, their money. And so being a good consumer and asking direct questions is a key. and being aware if you ask a question and the person turns it on you, like, what's wrong, Steve? Do you have trouble trusting? Or what's wrong, Steve? You have trouble with Christianity? Versus, no, I asked you a question. Are you a religious group or not? Do you bow to an altar with Moon's picture on it? I literally asked these women who recruited me into the Moonies, I should say, after my girlfriend dumped me. I asked them, are you part of a religious group? Oh, no, not at all. And within a few weeks, I'm bowing to and reciting a pledge to Korea and believing Moon was the Messiah. Strange world. Someone asked, one law that I could add to the Constitution that would fundamentally change cult abuse. Well, I did my doctoral thesis on this topic of how to update the law regarding undue influence. And the dissertation is on ProQuest. I put a PDF of it on my website as well. And I summarize the major brainwashing models of Robert Lifton, Margaret Singer, Edgar Schein. I connect the dots with trafficking law, which is a crime, and that's what Keith Raniere of Nexium was sentenced to 120 years in jail for, trafficking. I connect the dots with elder abuse legislation in California. I did a quantitative study on my BITE model showing authoritarian control, a very high factor analysis. I added a model of retired law professor Alan Shefflin, social influence model. So I've put together all the pieces to change the law. And there are two ways the law changes, and I'm not counting on a constitutional amendment, but if we can get enough robust scientific research to validate the BITE model, for example, or if there's a better model that someone can come up with, then we can change the law, or a precedent-setting case because the way the law works is judges read other judges' decisions and often base what they do on those earlier decisions. Have I experienced fair gaming? For those of you who don't know the cult of Scientology, this is a term from Hubbard, the founder, a former pulp fiction, science fiction writer, bigamist, pathological liar, malignant narcissist, homophobe, just to name a few things. Yes, I have experienced a lot of abuse. And the idea is that the group needs to be protected at all costs. So anyone who's identified as a potential trouble source or a suppressive person, these are two loaded terms from Scientology, you are permitted to lie, steal, cheat, frame people. So I've had complaints, bogus complaints against my license, which got thrown out. I've had members picketing my office wearing Nazi uniforms, holding placards saying, come join Steve Hassan and the destruction of religious freedom in America. They've gone through my trash before I bought shredders, really good shredders. So it's a nasty group. They really don't deserve to have tax exemption. I highly recommend TonyOrtega.org if you want to know more about them. Highly recommend my friend John Atak's book, Let's Sell Them a Piece of Blue Sky. There's much more I can talk about Scientology. Are far left and far right politics considered cultish? Yes. And I would say my issue is with authoritarianism on the left and the right. I'm a human rights person. And so I don't like anyone that's doing the BITE, whether it's a Marxist, Leninist, socialist cult or a right-wing fascist cult. I'm against it. And what fourth generation warfare is about is really where the enemies of democracy are infiltrating both sides, radicalizing them even further, whipping them up, and then AI is coming in and doing more damage. So we really have to establish data privacy legislation. We really need regulations to rein in the social media platforms. And I want to do a shout out to the Center for Humane Technology and Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin. I did a podcast with them. They're all, if you've seen the Social Dilemma documentary, that's theirs. And they're all about trying to explain how technology should serve humans and not humans be products at the slave and enslaved by technology. Is there a trustable database of data about cults and ways to proceed? The answer is not to my knowledge. Why? Because cults sue. And they also put bogus claims against site owners, particularly ex-members. And so a lot of great information is now in archive.org, but you've got to know what website to look for. And one of my dreams is to find colleagues in Scandinavia, maybe Norway, Sweden, Denmark, because they have strong consumer rights orientation versus in the United States, this absurd focus on copyright law. And I'll just do a quick comment that some of my friends put the secret OT levels of Scientology on the internet and were sued and arrested for copyright violations. And our friend and colleague in Norway, Andreas, who created Xenu.net, which was one of the first best resources on Scientology, said, "Oh, I'll put it up. Send it to me." So all of these secret OT levels, the highest secret levels where you're supposed to die of pneumonia if you're exposed to it before you're ready, you can go on his site and read it. So anyone who's a techie, anyone particularly in other countries that we don't have to worry about lawsuits and copyright infringement, there's a project that needs to be done. And my thought is that we need curators who are trustworthy for each cult or each category of cults. But it would be a great help to everyone to have access to trustworthy data. Is there any proof that Jehovah's Witnesses are a cult that can be shown to them? Depends. For some people, reading my first edition of Combating Cult Mind Control, tons of JWs read it because they knew the Moonies were a cult. They didn't think they were in a cult, but they read the book and they read the stories of other ex-members, and they wound up exiting the Jehovah's Witnesses because it described their experience and their experience of the Watchtower. When I bought back the rights and did an updated edition to include the internet in the version behind me, we decided to add the Jehovah's Witnesses to ex-members' stories to it. So I'm not sure that members are as free to read it. A bunch of JWs leave when they realize how inane their beliefs are, or how their beliefs changed over the decades, or they learn about the false prophecies of the apocalypse or Armageddon coming. But my experience is when you're talking to someone who is born into a group, there's not a single conversation you can have, but the more they understand cult mind control and other cults, and you ask them respectful questions, you can stimulate their authentic self to start to reality test. Um, Another question comment. My MAGA parents seem addicted to Fox News and they become kind of aggressive and insulting towards me, even though I bend over backwards to discuss things in a calm way. They think I'm stupid. There are millions of people who are suffering with a friend, a relative, a loved one who has experienced a radical personality change in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And let's face it, we're human beings and we are dependent on information that help us to figure out what to believe and what to do with our lives. And if you're plugged into Fox, you're going to adopt many of those beliefs. Or if you're plugged into CNN or MSNBC, same idea. And I really believe that it's your mind. You should control it, but you need to have a variety of different opinions. And you want to pursue what's true. And you want to look at sources. Are they reliable? Are they trustworthy? For me, in my personal and professional life, if somebody lies to me, I immediately get distrustful. If they lie twice, I don't want to have anything to do with them ever. And I always tell them the first time, this point you just said, and oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Don't do it again with me, because I have no time for people who are liars. In fact, that was the straw that broke the camel's back in my mind in 1976 when the ex-members asked me to read one of Moon's speeches to congressmen and senator and just asked me, what do you think? And I read it and I thought to myself, what a liar. And as soon as I had that thought, what a liar, it was like somebody opened the Venetian blinds and light came streaming in. And it was like, wait a minute, how could he be a representative of God if he's a liar? You know, the group teaches that the truth, but how can we follow someone who's a liar? Donald Trump has lied over 35,000 documented times in his time in the White House. You only need 2 or 3 lies. Get rid of the person. Back to what to do about your parents. I've written a book called Freedom of Mind, the dark blue one. I have many blogs and interviews with my strategies, what I call the strategic interactive approach. And it's a learning process to understand how to interact with someone who's been programmed in a mind control cult. For example, you can't do a frontal approach against the leader, the doctrine, or the group, because it will trigger the cult identity to get defensive. And often the defense is an attack on you. So you want to start with love, respect, curiosity. You want to have a frame of, I just want to know what to believe. I want to know what's true. You seem very intelligent. I respect you. Help me step into your shoes. Like, tell me what was important to you that caused you to believe in QAnon, for example. And really listen and agree to teach each other how to step into each other's shoes and make an agreement that no matter what, you care about them and things will get better. The last thing I want to say, because I tend to be long-winded, as you can tell already, is there's a very good documentary. Last time I saw it was on Amazon, called The Brainwashing of My Dad. It's by Jen Senko. And she did a documentary about her father, who got radicalized by listening to talk radio, then Fox News. And he became a bigot and became a hateful person. And she interviews former Republican operatives. She interviews Kathleen Taylor, who is a neuroscientist, about thought control. And eventually, towards the end of the documentary, her father gets ill and they unplug his Fox and all of his media, and he comes back to normal. And so there was a happy ending to the end. But The critical thing is, if they think you're stupid, don't buy into it. Stay grounded. And my hope is to do a training program for more people to understand how to talk to their loved ones. The legal and worldwide ramifications of shunning, any fines, rulings, etc. So shunning or disfellowshipping or excommunicating is a practice that has been going on for a really long time in a bunch of religious groups. If somebody is perceived to break a law in the group or challenge the leader, they're kicked out, and everyone's told not to talk to them, even if they're your relatives. Maybe they'll lose their work. I'm aware of a lawsuit in Belgium. I don't know what the status of the lawsuit is, by an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And the essence of the lawsuit is about civil rights discrimination. And the frame that's being used is, and I really think this fits, is that in the minds of cult members, they think the minute you say, I don't believe, I don't want to belong to you anymore, the person is demonized and they're held in very low esteem, and they're not afforded the basic courtesies and human rights. So that's going to be very interesting. I'm also aware of a man who grew up in a Hasidic Jewish Orthodox cultish group who is doing research, I think, in a university at Ohio, on the traumatic effects of shunning and such. It's definitely a very important area that I'd love to see more research. How to avoid getting sucked into a cult after moving to a new state or town. Research, research, research. And if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. I'm a big fan of advanced Google searches. What's an advanced search? It's where you put a term like the name of the group in quotes, plus the name of the leader in quotes, plus cult, plus sham, scam, brainwashing, ex-members. And don't just settle for the first 10 hits, but go 10 pages deep or 100 hits, because all the big wealthy cults are controlling through search engine optimization the first 3 pages pretty much. So if there's good information up, you're not going to probably find it in the first 3 pages. But always evaluate your sources. And if there's a website and it doesn't identify who it is, it could be legitimate. It might be a former member who's afraid of being harassed. But there are people like me. You can email us and we'll do our best to say, oh no, this is legit or it isn't legit. But just understand, friendships take time. A lot of people who get into cults talk about feeling like they've known the recruiter their whole life. And that's always a clue. Well, maybe it's something great, and maybe you're going to fall in love and get married, or maybe they're using NLP or some hypnotic techniques on you. They're mirroring your breathing. They're copying and mirroring your postures. So again, research, be observant, and you want to be wise. You don't want to be paranoid, and you don't want to close yourself off to meeting new people and having interesting experiences, but always stay centered and always keep listening to your gut. Because I ask people over 46 years, what was your first reaction when you met the cult member or you heard the cult leader? And the people almost universally said, oh, I thought he was a cult leader, or I thought it was crazy, or something like that. But then the influence like overrode that part of their mind. So if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. Do cults serve any purpose in society? Sure. People are basically social creatures, and on a certain level, you could look at a cult and say, I'm a Red Sox fan, and I have I'm not, but I have the t-shirts, and I spend money to go to the games, and I follow everybody's batting average. But it's free will. No one's programming you. No one's making you feel guilty, etc. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm into scuba diving. I love scuba diving. I'll have a conversation with almost anyone about dive sites or the kinds of animals or fishes that they've seen. So, I mean, there's a lot of benevolent, positive cults and lots of groups that are not cults. Again, my concern is the anti-democratic, authoritarian cults that want to make people blindly obedient to following some dangerous, malignant narcissist. Can the U.S. Congress introduce constitutional anti-cult laws? Probably not. But if we can create a definition of how the law can discriminate undue influence, then we're cooking. Because, for example, if you want to buy a used car and the odometer has been changed, that's fraud, and the person can be arrested and charged. But if somebody comes and knocks on your door and says, I want to study the Bible with you, and they don't disclose that their Bible is not recognized by any Christian or Jewish theologian, if they don't disclose that, I don't think that's kosher, to use a Jewish term. I don't think that's legitimate. So I'd like to see more honesty, forthrightness. I'd like to, as a tax-paying citizen, I'd like to stop subsidizing groups that are harming their members and trafficking their members. How and why intelligent people might get sucked into cults? Well, because we're curious, we like to learn, we like to improve ourselves, we like to make the world a better place. I always kind of said the more mind you have, the more it can be controlled. I also believe the more passion and imagination you have, the more that can be co-opted. And it's amazing how many truly brilliant people have been siphoned out of mainstream society into these mind control groups to help them get wealthy. And many develop technologies and products and things and make the leader super wealthy when they could be a member of society and contributing. It's really, really horrible. How to differentiate a regular church from a cult church. So my experience is that the cultic churches claim an exclusivity, that only they have the true connection to God, and all the other churches are dead and unspiritual. Only their interpretation is correct. You want to be careful about any group that claims that to put themselves above everything else. And you want to be careful of churches where the pastor or the leader claims to be an apostle or a prophet who gets direct revelations from God. Be careful. Right now in the United States, there's an estimated 40 million Americans in the New Apostolic Reformation groups, and the leaders indeed claim to cast out demons and do faith healings and speak in tongues and have direct revelations from God. It's these people who prophesied Trump would win in 2020, and when he lost, they're sticking with their guns. God told them that Trump would win, therefore Trump won. And all the evidence, all the lawsuits, all of the former officials inside the Trump White House can't get through. Why? Because they're programmed to be blindly obedient to their prophet or apostle, this man or this woman, because they're being protected from Satan. So be careful about that. How am I doing? I've got about 25 minutes left. Let me just have a quick sip. Ways to combat the narrative that people in cults are really happy. It's really tricky because as a Moonie, I was really happy. I was indoctrinated to believe how lucky I was to be chosen by the Messiah and God to save the planet. And even though I was sleep deprived and miserable and not seeing my family and throwing out all my original poetry, I wasn't allowed to have negative feelings about being in the group at all. So I would talk like this. I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. This organization has saved me. And then often people make up stories about how they were suicidal or drug addicts before the cult, often untrue. So anyway, I wouldn't try to combat the narrative when people say they're really happy. And for me, I almost always try to find common ground when I'm talking with someone, not lying, but just looking. If a statement has 5 points, I try to pick the 2 that I can agree with and work off of those 2. So if they say how happy they are, because I'm a former member, it's easy for me to say, I know the feeling. And they'll often say, what do you mean? Well, in 1974, I was 19 years old and I met some women. They flirted with me, and I spent 2.5 years thinking that the Messiah was a Korean and that World War III would happen in 1977. And the whole time I was really happy, happier than I ever was in my whole life. And ideally, the person says, really? How could you be happy? And well, I was trained to believe that I was doing God's will and that there are all these ancestors in the spirit world who are stuck and they were dependent on me to give them good vitality elements, da 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 da. So I try to get them out of their mindset into understanding a different cult mindset. But if someone tells me they're happy, I say, great. I don't try to talk them out of it. And if I ask them, when was the last time you slept 8 hours, and they say, oh, 3 years ago, I say, there's a lot of research, military and astronauts, that we really need 7 to 9 hours of restful sleep for our mind to be clear, for our immune system to function properly. Why don't you check it out? Because really, you'll get a lot more done if you sleep 8 hours a day than working that many hours. I'm going to move on. Connection between Amway and the connection with Christian dominionism. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm going to go back to Google. If you Google Amway and the connection with Christian dominionism, you're going to find connections galore between Betsy DeVos, the former education cabinet member in the Trump administration. She got all of her money from Amway, and she's into Christian dominionism. She was into dismantling public education. And for those of you who don't understand the term dominionism, it basically is a non-traditional Christian concept, because most Christians think, well, Jesus is going to return, there'll be a rapture, and we're going to go to heaven, and the world will be restored. Well, dominionists want to take power. They want to control the government. They want to control business and money, and they want the freedom to discriminate against everyone who doesn't have their explicit beliefs, even though their beliefs are non-biblical. Let's see, more questions. Can you speak of supernatural practices used to control? Seems like a taboo subject to discuss, but I've seen it inflicted on a friend and it's hard to find help. I really don't know what this means, and I would need to have more details. I can guess what it means. What comes to my mind is a number of people that I've worked with who contacted me who were involved with a cult from India called Sai Baba, or another cult from India, Rajneesh, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, also renamed Osho. And these folks claimed that their leaders had these supernatural powers. They could read minds, they could do astral projection. Uh, some of them claim that they were being sexually assaulted in their sleep by the cult leader. But it turned out to be a remnant of their brainwashing, hypnosis, mind control. Um, and I needed to find out how to persuade them that they didn't have supernatural powers. For example, Sai Baba had millions of followers, still does. He used to do sleight of hand magic tricks and trick people into thinking he was manifesting rings, diamond rings, or Rolex watches with serial numbers on it out of thin air. And it was just, sleight of hand magic tricks. And he got exposed on video and then stopped doing it. And a lot of these cult gurus use hypnotic techniques to create experiences in people's minds that aren't real. They believe to be real, but they're not real. I'm going to tell one more quick story. It was a cult of Frederick Lenz, or Zen Master Rama was one term for himself that he used. And he would tell people to meditate to his tape, but his voice is very hypnotic. And he said in the meditation tape that people were supposed to listen to that when they're ready to see their true teacher, they would see a golden light emanating from this teacher's bodies. And I was doing an intervention with a young man. I think I described this story actually in Combating. And I said, Jim, like, what convinced you to give your life to Rama? And he said, oh, it was the golden light. And I said, and here's another important thing. I never criticize people if they say they have a spiritual experience, because how do I know? Maybe it is. But I always try to offer another interpretation over the experience. So he said it was the golden light. And I said, have you ever heard of hypnosis? And he said, this is not hypnosis. And I said, well, in hypnosis, there's something called positive hallucinations, and you can have visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, kinesthetic hallucinations. And I said, consider the possibility that you were listening to the tapes of him as you were meditating, and you were primed to have this expectation and this experience. He said, oh, no, not at all. And he said, prove it. And it was the first time anyone had ever said anything like that to me in a case. And I said, I was thinking on my feet. I said, okay, Jim, I want you to begin to meditate the way Rama taught you to meditate. He closed his eyes, and I said, and I want you to go deeper than you ever gone before. I wasn't using a voice. I was just giving words. Right? I want you to go deeper than you've ever gone before. And then I gave him a double bind. I said, and Jim, I don't want you to open your eyes until you're fully ready to see an even brighter light emanating from my body. And in a minute or two, he opened his eyes and went, oh, it's even brighter than it was with Rama. That's it. I'm out. And he wanted to get his friends out, like on the spot. That was just one of the many stories of my work. What to do when you can't connect with the parent? Yeah, brainwashed by Fox News. So it's kind of what I've said before, but the key thing is, and I want to cite a TEDx talk I did. I think the title is "How Can I Know If I've Been Brainwashed?" And I essentially give a 4-step reality testing strategy. And the first step is turn off Fox News. Get off platforms. Just go in nature, sleep, have fun, listen to fun music, go dancing. Like, let your brain come back to baseline. Second, learn about authoritarian cult models, the Chinese communist brainwashing models, the pimp trafficker models, my bite model. Then deliberately seek out critics and ex-members, because in every mind control group, members are told, don't trust ex-members, don't trust critics. Anyone who says anything negative, don't believe them. Well, my position is you're intelligent. It's your mind. You can decide whether something is true or not. Why don't you seek out the critics and former members, hear what they have to say, and then at least you'll know that information. And then the last step is to really go back in your mind before you got involved or to your earliest memory, thinking about BITE, for example, behavior, information, thought, and emotional control, and what the critics said, and see if it gels, if it makes sense. And if it does, the final question is, if I knew then what I know now, would I have ever gotten involved in the first place? And if the answer is no, then it's time to leave. So that's my reality testing strategy. Our cult leader is still recruiting to thousands on social media. How can we get it taken down? I don't know. I'm not sure we can. And lawsuits against the leader by former members who've been harmed, maybe. But right now, there's no legislation that enforces consumer protection on social media, and there needs to be. And you explain what to do when family member is suddenly really interested in Hare Krishna. It's a very good question. So, like, what do you do if you have a friend or family member and they're suddenly spending a lot of time or a lot of money with anything, a person or a group or an ideology? My best suggestion is to say, hey, it seems like you're really into this. Tell me more. Explain to me. Like, how did you first hear of them? What is it that attracts you? What research have you done? Have you ever checked out what former high-ranking members have to say about it? I definitely have critical opinions of the Krishna cult. And yes, I know George Harrison gave a lot of money and wrote some beautiful songs about the Krishnas. But this was a cult where the leader said women's brains were smaller, therefore they were inferior to men. A leader who said the moon it was bigger than the sun. Smuggling dope. I have an interview with a former long-term member about a murder that was committed in the group. Not a good group. And there was lots of child molestation in Krishna schools. How can we stop cults that are making their way from the US into, is that Australia or Austria? I think it's Australia, from targeting people. I don't know. Right now, the world is open through the internet, and I would go to your politicians, officials. I don't know if there's any consumer protection agencies down there, but let's see. We'll go on for some more questions. Somebody looks like Blas was saying about Sai Baba. He produced holy ash from his hands, but it was just the trick. Yeah, so there would be a little ball of verbooty, it's called, and then all of a sudden the ash would come, but it was palmed beforehand. And yes, Sai Baba did claim to be God. And I did a interview and blog about what's going on in India right now with Modi, the prime minister, who's a Hindu nationalist, who is persecuting other religions. India is a democracy, by the way, and he's trying to destroy it there. Oh, and thank you. My assistant is putting up. Has anyone ever done brain scans before or after deprogramming? No, not to my knowledge. And for me, I would be very interested. It would take a lot of time and money, but I'd love to like scan the brains of an entire high school class and then get them to agree to periodic brain scans. And because if we have a before and then a cult and then an after, then we're really cooking. And I want to also say that I just read a paper yesterday that some neuroscientist identified some brain mechanism for religious experiences, which I really would like to learn more about. And Oswald Spengler asks, any comments on pathological altruism? That's a new one for me. Well, when I hear the word altruism, I've been talking very critically of Ayn Rand, the cult of Ayn Rand, and her doctrine of selfishness is good and altruism is evil. I can only guess what Oswald is saying about pathological altruism, and that is, I guess, where you're trying to not pay attention to your own issues and always putting others ahead of yourself to a point where it's self-destructive. That's my guess about what that is. But I invite anyone to email center@freedomofmind.com if that's not what you meant. Dr. Hassan, can a person be manipulated into becoming a narcissist? Very interesting question. So the latest theories are that personality disorders, all types of personality disorders, including narcissism, is rooted into early childhood lack of secure attachment. So if you were secure and had a healthy sense of self, what I can say, if you get recruited into a cult, as I was, and you're programmed to be like the cult leader who's a narcissist, as I was told to think like Moon and feel like Moon and walk like Moon and talk like Moon. My cult identity became more and more narcissistic because I was emulating the leader. And so, but it wasn't my authentic self, it was my cult self. And that was Appleton. Cooper Jackson, do you consider the Jehovah's Witness group a dangerous cult? Regarding the no blood issue, 1,000%. And for those who don't know, this was a concocted doctrine. It wasn't even there at the founding of the Watchtower Society, but somebody came up with the rule that getting a transfusion would be a crime against God. And they use quotes from the Torah, or what's known as the Old Testament, about kosher laws, about draining the blood from animals and not eating the blood. And they wrongly interpret it as you can't get a blood transfusion. So countless people have died for absolutely no reason. And the Jehovah's Witnesses also say we're the true organization because only we know the true name of God. It's Jehovah. But as a Jew, the letters of God, Yud He Vav He, is not Jehovah, and it's not understood that you can ever pronounce the direct name of God anyway. I got out. So let me just put a plug in for hashtag I got out, igotout.org. A group of us survivors of different types of controlling groups and relationships. And what we would love to do is get more ex-members who are together and willing to share their story to share their story. Why? To destigmatize the current notion that only weak, stupid people get into cults, or that there's no life after cult, which is both are absolutely incorrect. Now, the question that asked, can you speak to why child sexual abuse is so prevalent in destructive cults? It's a good question. Child abuse is a power thing, not a love thing. So pedophiles, and they exist, and they can predate on people when they're in a religious cult, maybe a political cult as well. They're weaker, they're more vulnerable. Of course, then there's the theory that 1 out of 4 girls are assaulted in childhood sexually, 1 out of 6 boys. And a small percentage of those who get assaulted go on to become predators. That's another theory. But all in all, I would say we need to abolish corporal punishment, beating children because they read a Bible verse, please. Taken out of context. But I just think the whole crime of sexual abuse against women, against men, against children is awful. And I think that we just have to do a much better job of protecting little ones. I want to give a shout out to my friend Ira Chaliff, who I recently did an Influence Continuum podcast with and a blog, who did a little short thing for young people, but it's good for any age. Think, blink, choice, voice. If someone is asking you to do something or telling you to do something, think about it. Give yourself time, reflect on it. Think about your choices and don't be silent. So it really works well. And check out I Got Out. How can we stop cults? Oops, did I miss something? How can we stop cults? Oh, no, I got that one already. I have a trusty helper with these questions. Let's see. Yes, I'm reading some of the comments that Blas made about Modi is their version of Trump. Absolutely, that's India. Go check out my interview with Narendra Nayak, who is a major figure, skeptic in India, and trains his students to debunk, false godmen and such. I'm looking at the clock, and we're going to wrap up in the next 2 minutes. I just want to let you know, follow me on Twitter at Cult Expert, on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, and ask whatever questions you want, and I'll make my best effort to answer. But please come to freedomofmind.com. We have a 3.5-hour course that I put together. I'm readying a longer course directed to mental health professionals, but much more detailed, that I hope to make live very shortly. And, it's your mind and only you should control it, is one of my statements. Also, love is stronger than mind control. And follow the truth and put your ego aside and be prepared to change your mind. And that in the end, people will change their own minds versus you giving them facts and trying to persuade them to change. Doesn't work that way. And that final thing that helped get me out was, Steve, what do you think? Read this and tell me what you think. That's what got me, was that I finally listened to my own inner voice that said, he's a liar. I've heard him say 100 times how he didn't respect Americans, and now he's telling congressmen how much he respects Americans. Liar. So I want to thank everyone. Maybe we'll see you again. Please subscribe. I have an email once a week, a notification of all the different interviews that are coming up in the blog and podcast. And have a good night. Thanks. Bye.